Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Caleb and Alina video. Actually, before I get into your comments, I want to react to some comments in general, not a specific comment, and people emailing me, telling me that Alina has some past apparent alleged posts on social media that are racist. I have seen some of them. People have sent me links to some using the N-word, and also something about being Asian and specifically being half Asian, just reading. And again, I can never know if this is accurate or not. Sometimes things are manufactured on the internet, so I can't know for sure. But what it looks like is there's an alleged post from her talking about her crush on Hugh Grant, and she says, quote, "And his wife is Asian, so all the kids would be kinda Asian," and then she has frowny face and then cry emoji. And I don't know exactly what she means by that, but what it looks like is that she's saying that to have half Asian kids is somehow an abomination. As a half Japanese, half white, half European American person, I have heard it all, particularly when I was younger, these ideas that mixed race children were abominations, they were disgusting, they were unnatural, there was something to be feared about them, people didn't know where to categorize them, and I've heard it all. So that looks like that's what that is talking about. I don't know what Alina's response would be to this, but it doesn't surprise me. I've been hearing it my whole life from Americans and people around the world. And from what I understand, people telling me that her part of the world, there's a lot of racism. So just like in the United States, perhaps, different versions of it, or even worse, to a worse degree. I don't know. But it doesn't surprise me. And so when I hear this, I have the following reaction. The first reaction I have is pain. It hurts. Why would half Asian kids like myself be frowny face cry emoji? It still wouldn't be okay, but if Alina's sister were to have half Asian kids, at least that impacts Alina's life. Alina is just talking about Hugh Grant having a wife, apparently, who is Asian, of Asian descent. So just the fact that those kids exist in the world is frowny face cry emoji. Again, I don't know what Alina's intent was of that. At the very least, it's tone deaf. At the worst, it's flat out racism against people like me. So it's pain, it hurts, and it's like, why? Where does this idea come from? I mean, it's absurd. What's the difference? The purity of certain races. And I will say that Asian people are like, as a Japanese American, I get it from both sides. White people hated me and Japanese people hated me. The only people I felt comfortable with were people in Hawaii, because that's where a lot of people like me, a lot of Hapa people exist. Certainly there's more today. But when I was growing up, particularly on the east side of Seattle, in Sammamish, there were none of my people. It was just my siblings and me. Yeah, it hurts. And so that's my first reaction. The second reaction that I'm hearing from people have is, sort of cancellation of her. And, that's, the internet's free to decide that. But for me, I'll tell you, I have close friends of mine who are racist against my people. A friend of mine, she said a number of things, but one of the things she said was, well, Asians don't like their picture being taken because they believe it steals their soul. And when I heard that, I'm like, 1, what? 2, what? 3, you're literally talking about half of the population of the planet thinking one thing. 4, where did you hear that from? And so I challenged her on it, and this is a white American woman living in Seattle, presumably in contact with different cultures. She was adamant. I thought, me challenging her, she would say, oh, well, maybe I heard that once, and maybe I need to, and oh, an Asian is telling me this, that they don't believe that pictures steal your soul. I thought she would relent very quickly, but she didn't. And I think to this day, she literally is stubbornly holding on to this view, even though I've come at it from various different angles. Did I cancel her as a friend? No. She's still a good person. Can good people hold racist values? Yeah. In fact, most good people do have racist values, and most people who have racist values are good people. So does this mean that Alina is a bad person or a good person? I don't know. We can't know. But can Alina be good and still have racist notions and feel confident enough in those racist notions to advertise them publicly on the internet, yeah, that happens. Now, I'm not saying you as an individual are supposed to like her or not like her or think she's a good person or a bad person or something, but I'm just telling you my reaction. That's all I can know about is my own reaction. If I met Alina and heard her explanation, would I think that she was a good person and accept her apology? I probably would. Like I said, most people hold racist values. If you just polled every person on the planet, I'm sure, and really got honest opinions or values extracted from them, I'm guessing the vast majority of people would have deplorable ideas that they did not invent, that they were not born with, that were given to them by their society and their families. So it's no excuse, really, particularly once you get to a certain age, that you should start to challenge yourself in some of those ways. There's ample opportunity, particularly in today's world. There's that. Now, she's from a different culture, and and I've seen some of her apologies that she said, well, I don't really understand the English language, that kind of thing. On one hand, it's like, oh, okay, maybe. On the other hand, of the people on this show that come from other countries, she seems to be extremely aware of Western culture, particularly American culture. I can't know that for sure, but there's certain markers, the way that the slang that she uses sometimes, the fluency in which her and Elijah speak in English, it seems likely that it would not have crossed their radar that using the N-word or saying something like this would consider to be hurtful to other people. That excuse, it's hard to know. We can't know from their perspective. But it doesn't surprise me. Racism is everywhere. And when these examples crop up, like in Alina or others that we see online, it doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise any of us, really. Even in the most progressive pockets of various cultures, Seattle being one of them, it shouldn't surprise us that racism is here. It's everywhere. Sexism is everywhere. Classism is everywhere. And it's just a part of our lives. It doesn't mean we get used to it. It doesn't mean we excuse it. It doesn't mean we don't react against it. But it shouldn't really shock us as much, in my opinion. The other thing that pops in my head is probably every cast member on 90 Day Fiancé holds some deplorable viewpoint that we probably just never were aware of, or the show edited it out or something. So the fact that Alina has, now again, I'm not excusing Alina, I'm not saying that it should go uncommented on, but that's just it's just my reaction. I'm not surprised. I'm like, yeah, I've been dealing with people thinking I'm an abomination my entire life, and will until the day I die. Until the day I die, there will be a sizable percentage of the planet that will think that there's something disgusting about the fact that I'm half Japanese and half European. And that doesn't make me happy. It makes me sad. It makes me particularly sad for others, for kids. I feel like I can take it. I feel like I've been raised well enough and have enough support that it doesn't assault my core. But I feel bad for kids who are being raised today in that environment. It's awful. It's here to stay. Alina is an example of that. Let's take care of ourselves as we realize the horribleness of the human race. I'm laughing because I don't know what else to do. Okay, so Caleb and Alina, the morning after video. Good old Jules says, I think Caleb is really thoughtful, and it's great to see how he is learning and growing from this time with Alina. Alina, on the other hand, acts like a very entitled diva. Yeah, it is interesting to see Caleb and to think about even the first few episodes, how he seemed a little tone deaf, and it seemed like a train wreck waiting to happen, that in actuality, he was being honest and open, and saying things that maybe other people would edit out, but are perhaps understandable to a lot of people. Basil, I recently started couples therapy, and we had a session after a stretch of no fighting, and we had nothing meaty to bring to our therapist, like you were talking about in the video. Could you advise on what to do when you don't have any immediate problems to bring to a therapy session? Yeah, this happens frequently, and really it's the goal of my work with couples is to eventually get to a place where they come into my office and sit on my couch, and they look at each other like, oh, things have been going pretty well. We haven't really been fighting. And And that's a sign of good things. That means that they had a week or however much time it was since our last session where there wasn't any major blow up. Now, it might not be ideal because lack of conflict is just halfway there. We want to enhance intimacy and actualize the relationship to its fullest potential, and that's what you work on. So there's two things that I recommend couples work on, and to you couples therapists out there, I'm guessing you do this, and if you don't, then maybe take this as a tip, is one, to focus on how did you not have conflict? This is the first thing I ask. It's like, oh, so I'm hearing that you haven't had conflict since our last session. How did you achieve that? That sounds great. This is a solution-focused, strength-based, positive psychology approach. And there's a lot of, you can talk for a whole session about what you did differently in moments to avoid conflict. And sometimes people will say things like, well, we just didn't have a lot of contact with each other. And I'll say, well, you still could have fought because if you think in the past, if you really wanted to, you could have fought about a lot of things, but you chose not to. And it's important to recognize that couples enhancing a relationship, it's about choices. It's also about recovering from our traumas, but half of it is being aware of your choice in the moment. You have a choice to go down this road or that road. And if you're trying to have things go more functionally for both of you so that both of you can get your needs met, there are some roads that are more likely to produce that. And once you become aware of that, then you can make that choice. And when you start making those choices in the positive, you really want to highlight that. You don't want to only talk about the times they take a negative and highlight that. You want to highlight, like, look what we did. And this is obviously something you can do even when things are going badly. You can say, like, okay, well, what day didn't you fight? Again, this is a solution-focused positive psychology approach. The other thing you can do is talk about things that are kind of the icing on the cake, which is like sexuality is often the icing on the cake. Not always. Sometimes that's core. But for some people, their sexual life has suffered over time and with conflict. And it can be something that you can talk about if things haven't been conflictual. So you can talk about sexuality. You can talk about, okay, well, where would you like your relationship to be? What kind of intimacy would you like to have? What kind of honesty would you like to have? The other thing you can talk about when there aren't conflicts to talk about is talking about each of their individual pasts, their childhoods, and how, because sometimes, often, and when I teach couples therapists, my approach is to eventually connect childhood relational traumas to current conflict in your intimate relationship, because they're always connected in my mind. That's the model that I follow. There's no scientific way of proving that per se, but it always seems to resonate with the people I work with. And sometimes you don't have the luxury, though, of investigating the past because you're too busy dealing with the putting out fires in the present because there's fights that just happened. And so you don't have the luxury to kind of fully meander and explore one's childhood, which you can also do. Anyway, Debbie video, someone emailed in about that, an anonymous patron. She says, I feel bad for both Colt and Debbie. Unfortunately, I have found myself in a very similar situation with my own mother. My single mother has never lived alone. She has major abandonment trauma as a result of her extremely abusive and neglectful parents growing up. When the conversation ever comes up with her, it is immediately like Debbie with the assumption that she will become homeless. Is being homeless a common fear for people with abandonment schemas? Absolutely. When you're a child and you're being abandoned and neglected, might literally being threatened as a 4-year-old that you're going to get kicked out of the house, you have a trauma of being completely abandoned and thus homeless and unsafe and completely helpless to the dangers of the world. And so you've internalized that feeling, and your solution to that feeling is to never be abandoned and to always be close physically with other people in the same home. And so, yeah, it is a frequent thing. It's also a common cognition of other kinds of traumas, but yeah, it is common. What Debbie exhibits is actually quite common. So I'd be curious about Debbie's traumas growing up that would inform that. Darcy and Stacey video. It's Georgia Not says, I think the real problem here is that Stacey is sabotaging Darcy. She's terrified of not being the twin that's ahead. that's doing better, that has her life in order. Yeah, it seems possible. I mean, it's hard to know what's going on with Stacey, but that's one possible explanation, is that for Stacey, she always considered herself to be more functional than Darcy. And at any chance that Darcy has to rise, quote unquote, to her level, Stacey sabotages either consciously or subconsciously. The other hypothesis that I've had and I've talked about is that the two of them need each other. You know, growing up, my impression is that they might have only had each other. And one of the ways that they bond is through triangulation, which a lot of people do when they're undifferentiated. They need an opposing force to bring them together, an enemy. And I think it's possible that Stacey and Darcy, to preserve their closeness, they actually need a Georgie. They need a Jesse. They need a Tom. And when Georgie didn't really fit the mold, they made him fit the mold. But I don't know. Shanika says, so does Florian have this thriving, lucrative career that's not being shown? This is referring to how Stacey is criticizing Georgie for not having a job. So does Florian have this thriving, lucrative career that's not being shown on the show? He's not working either. Stacey takes care of Florian and has been doing so for years. The difference between Florian and Georgie is Florian actually did lie and cheat, but he knows that his place when it comes to Stacey and Darcy. He knows to sit back, co-sign with whatever they say, and allow Stacey to treat him like a child. She literally gave him children's floaties in this episode. Yeah, I didn't react to that part because it didn't seem important. But yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about, and I forgot about that. There's so much TV that I react to these days that it's hard for me to keep track. I've started to keep notes, but you're reminding me, Shanika, that yeah, last season Florian did lie and cheat. And he actually did, and somehow everything that should be seemingly accusing of Florian is being, transferred onto Georgie. Georgie is a mooch when Florian is arguably a mooch. Georgie is lying when Florian actually did lie. So that's interesting to think, right? That for Stacey, subconsciously, she might be projecting or displacing. The more people use the word projection, including clinicians, but the more precise, the more accurate term is displacing. Because to the idea, who knows, but the idea is for Stacey to confront even the notion in her mind that Florian is a mooch and a liar and a cheater, which I don't know if that's accurate, but if this is true, for her to even reconcile with that truth would be very hard for her, because it would mean that the relationship is a sham, he's not a dependable person, that kind of thing. And that's a really hard thing to deal with in your mind. You have this tension of like, he's no good, but I need him to be good. I need this to work out. And so there's this tension there, right? Well, we have defense mechanisms to deal with this tension. And one of them is, and all of them have to do with some level of denial. But how do we deny? How do we manage to deny? Well, one of the ways to deny is to displace that onto someone else. You have this energy to attack lying and cheating and mooching, but you don't know where to, but to put it where it should go is to threaten your needs. And so you just displace it somewhere else onto Georgie. It's an interesting thing to think about. Jasmine says, I think the couples counseling, okay, so I talked about how originally it was couple counseling, and then I started hearing people saying couples counseling, and I didn't like it, but eventually I gave in because I just I got indoctrinated. And so Jasmine is saying, I think the couples counseling is being used in the possessive form with the apostrophe, because that's the couples counseling session, like the couples date or the couples romantic dinner, LOL. So yeah, I get that, but that's not actually the way it's being used, because when you see couples counseling in print, it never has an apostrophe. And if we go to, but the same logic that I use, and you're just laughing, but Jasmine, but by the same logic, it should be individuals counseling or groups counseling or families counseling with an apostrophe S, and that doesn't sound right? Anyway. Whatever, language, what are you going to do? K11 says, so Stacey is mad that Georgie doesn't have a job, and then she's mad when he says he does have a job. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and he's a masseuse, LOL. And your sister made him quit his job and get rid of his apartment. Then she dumped him while she was overseas. Now Georgie is the toxic one? Yeah, there certainly seems to be some double standards there. Vicar says, I've recently rewatched your earlier Darcy videos, and it just baffles me how she can go from being the poor bullied one to being the bully herself. I used to feel so much empathy for Darcy. Why would she sabotage this relationship now? I don't get it. Yeah, it is kind of a mystery. But I will say that when we have significant relational traumas, they will distort and cause us to see recreations of relationships that aren't actually being recreated. So it doesn't surprise me. I mean, if any of you are like this or have a friend like this who has many years of a relationship train wreck, the narrative often is that of Darcy. It was like, oh, they were all jerk faces. And by the way, don't be a jerk face. And that can be true, but in addition or in lieu of that, it could be the individual, their relational traumas are playing out in such a way that actually forces even potentially good relationships into a train wreck that they walk away from feeling abused. So the thing that what Darcy is doing is not foreign to me anyway. Big Ed video. This is him talking about holding Coyote after the shooting. Malcriata says, it annoys me that Ed seems to be using that experience to build up his meant-to-be fantasy. He seems to be romanticizing it, which is a major yikes for me. Yeah. I mean, so on one level, the yikes part of it is he's manipulative. He wakes up in the morning and says, how can I use this to my advantage so I can get my hooks into her? And a lot of people see Ed that way. I don't know if that's true. It could be true. I have no idea. More likely, though, given what I've experienced with people, is that he's desperate for love and attention and to be validated. And so he's looking for any angle to get his needs met, but doesn't take the time to stop and say, well, what's the bigger picture here, and what are they going through, and what are my needs? Anyway. Hello says, the only thing I can compare Ed's behavior to is Michael Scott from The Office. The situation he gets into and the way he explains them is exactly how Michael Scott would. That's interesting. I never thought about that. By the way, I'm a huge Office fan. I watched it from the very beginning. Late at night, will frequently watch Office clips on YouTube. In fact, on my Office, on this Office, is that Office plaque thing, that icon thing. Anyway. Jasmine says, you're not nitpicking, by the way. So I was like, am I nitpicking? About the mom crying. I was saying, it looks like a put on, but I don't know. You're not nitpicking. The mom crying definitely seemed theatrical. I'd say it seems like a fake cry you do to gain more empathy or attention. It's possible. It's also possible to think that she's on television and she doesn't seem extremely comfortable on TV, but imagine knowing that everything you do is being filmed and that people are going to scrutinize everything you do. That as a mom, you might feel a lot of pressure to exhibit care and emotion about what your son is going through. I mean, just imagine yourself, if you're a parent, that your child is on television, the extension of your heart and soul and body is on television, experiencing bad things and maybe even being criticized. How much insecurity or concern you might have as a mother to exhibit to the world that you care and that you're trying your best, because everything your child does is a reflection on you, particularly for mothers in our society. So I don't know if that what was going on. She's thinking, okay, I have to show the world that I care or something. Anyway, Danielle Mohammed video. Lucas says, even though Danielle is in stalker mode on the phone with him, she keeps having that same childlike smile on her face. I'm wondering where that stems from. Was she modeled this kind of behavior and taught that this is what love is? So in her mind, is this all correct, even though from the outside she's clearly acting extremely strange and creepy? Yeah. So it's hard to know where that smile comes from. Is that insecurity about being filmed? Is it some sort of psychopathy? Is it childishness? I think it's probably the latter. I obviously don't know. But you also asked, Lucas, was she modeled this kind of behavior and taught that this was what love is? I suspect so, because people who exhibit this kind of behavior often were modeled it. A lot of our behavior that bothers other people was modeled to us growing up, whether it's being critical or quiet or whatever it is. Whatever, just think about yourself, what people tend to criticize you for. I bet you anything you could say, I felt the same way about my family when I was growing up. My parents treated me that way, or my older siblings treated me that way. The same thing that people are accusing me of is what I was accusing my parents of when I was a kid. The words might be different, but the vibe is the same. And so, like, one of the easiest ways to figure out the way you bother and annoy other people is to just take an inventory of the way your parents annoy you. Because in all likelihood, you annoy everyone around you in the identical way, but you're in denial of it because you're trying to preserve your ego, which isn't healthy, right? So, but baby steps. You don't want to beat yourself up for it, obviously. Alicia says, society kind of glorifies stalking by women. Lots of rom-coms make stalking behaviors look cute. It's actually creepy, always, always, always. Right. To see stalking behavior in women, it's sometimes hard for people to even recognize it, or even to accept that women can stalk men, which of course is possible and happening on this show. Privacy says, thank you for clarifying this. I was recently a victim of a stalker. I kept answering his phone calls, and I met with him to end it because I thought it would stop him from calling me so much. When I met with him, he attacked me and tried to force me into his apartment. I realized that by answering his nonstop phone calls prior to meeting him, I was only encouraging him. So eventually I had to ghost him completely. I still don't know if he's gone for good. But after a couple days of ignoring his phone calls and texts, he seems to have faded away. Hopefully he's gone. These stalkers really don't take no for an answer, and you giving them any type of attention or benefit of the doubt just feeds and encourages their stalking behavior. Sometimes you just have to cut them off completely, regardless if it comes off as rude or not. Yeah, absolutely, Privacy. So this is a lesson that I've had to learn myself, is that, because I'm guessing you're like me, Privacy, in that when you've hurt someone's feelings, or when someone needs you or desperately wants to be with you, you feel bad for them. And also you just don't like to be in conflict. You don't like to be rude to people. And so my normal mode is to be nice and to level with people and to accommodate. And because eventually with most people that works, with most people that helps the situation. But with stalkers and people who are prone to this behavior, it does often encourage it. In fact, nice people and people pleasers are often very easy victims for stalkers because it plays into the whole pattern, And I feel like everyone, particularly people pleasers, need to learn there's niceness and accommodation and giving people the benefit of the doubt and talking with people, helping them to see the light is helpful in a lot of situations, but there are some that you need to be able to detect, like, oh, this is one where I need to draw a very firm boundary, and it's going to feel mean to me. It's going to feel like I'm being mean. I'm being the jerk face, when in reality, I'm actually helping everyone, particularly myself, by drawing these boundaries. So I'm glad that you had, and by the way, it's only been a few days, so the other thing I'll say, Privacy, is get support. And you can also call the police, depending, but I would get support. I would do what you need to do to feel safe. If you're worried as you're walking to your car, get people around you. I've been a support person for others as they've gone through this. And it just feels better to know that other people are around. And usually, not always, but the more time that goes by, the less likelihood that they're gonna, think about you, essentially, and target you. Charlie says, I saw in an interview with the actor Robert Pattinson And he said he took a fan that was harassing him out to dinner and was purposely as boring as he could be so she would leave him alone. He gray rocked her. Right. So there's this idea of gray rocking or gray stoning or something, that with people like this, you have to become a gray stone or a gray rock, meaning that you're very boring. You don't respond, you don't engage, you have very short answers, or another version of this in today's world is you're not on social media, because stalkers can be triggered to stalk and have opportunities to stalk if they see you online. And so becoming as boring and as unnoticeable as possible is a way of dealing with some of these people. Because sometimes to draw boundaries with them actually will cause them to be more abusive. And of course, there's no easy answer to stalkers and abusive people. And of course, if you're in a lot of danger, call the police or call the hotline, which is just type in the DV hotline online and you'll get the chat and the phone number for that. But anyway, Robert Pattinson, apparently, according to Charlie, says there was someone harassing him and Robert Pattinson took this person out to dinner and was trying to be boring. I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. Apparently it worked for Pattinson, but I think that was kind of just a stroke of luck. Gino and Jasmine videos, Marie says, Gino looks genuinely afraid. I don't think he was taking the high road. I think he's freezing. Yeah, there were a number of comments along these lines that Gino's being abused and that, because I was saying, well, it's good that Gino isn't reacting. He's taking the high road. I must have said something like that. But other people are saying, no, he's not taking the high road. He's freezing because he's being abused. He doesn't know what else to do. It's hard to know what's going on in Gino's mind, but there's that. The other thing people were saying was that I was, because as I was pointing out the abusive behavior that we're seeing, I was also saying, but, Gino isn't really helping because he could be saying this and this and that. People were saying, that's unfair to Gino because to abuse victims, you can't expect them to be super functional because, one, they're being abused and they're terrified. Plus, it's not really fair to blame the victim, so to speak. And yeah, and I totally agree. It's hard to know exactly what's happening. We'd have to ask them, blah, blah, blah. But it's a fair response to my response. And I certainly would not want to participate in blaming victims, absolutely. But I will tell you the mode that I was in when I was reacting to that, when I see, because I've seen Gino, and I've seen worse cases than Gino and Jasmine in my office. And what I do is I definitely go after the Jasmines and their abusive behavior, and that can take time, and I have to build a relationship with that person. But with the Ginos, I also, there are tasks that I ask them to do to help the overall situation. They're not to blame for the abuse, but they can help with the overall effort of reducing those moments by doing what I was saying, which is by being a little bit more understanding and saying things like again, this isn't Gino's, it's not fair to say this is Gino's fault, but he could have helped by saying things like, so if you want to change the house, that's totally fine, and I want to marry you, I want, that's the whole idea, and once we get there, I want to absolutely collaborate on the house. I just don't want you to insult me, and I don't want you to attack my ex because, she's not a bad person. I never want to be with her again, and let me, there's certain things he could have said that could have helped. Does that mean that it's by me saying that I'm blaming him for his behavior, for her behavior? No. Does that mean that everyone in Gino's shoes would have the ability to do that in that moment, given the fact that they're being berated and yelled at and threatened? No, absolutely not. Would I understand if Gino was like, all I could do was just sit there and react in this very calm way? I would totally understand that, yeah. Good old Lavender says, seems like Jasmine dominates him and then turns sweet to get her way. But Gino isn't as much of a pushover as he looks. He's catching on, and I don't think her beauty will save her. Yeah. Let's see. I guess I've already reacted to those kinds of videos. Silver Sun says, The only way to avoid conflict with these people is to just agree with everything they say, which is terrible. Eventually, it starts eroding at who you are. Yeah, Silver brings up this good point that as you experience this behavior over time, it erodes who you are. You become a shell of a person because you're at this crossroads where if you hold on to who you are, it means that you have to recognize you're being treated badly, and you might have to fight back a little bit. But if you're constantly being abused, that's not a very palatable road. So there's another road where you just give up who you are. You just become the shell of you just become a pleaser. You just become reactive to the abuser so you can avoid being abused, and you never even check in with who I am and what do I want, because under the circumstances it's actually easier to go down that road. So yeah. Diary says, I wonder when watching this if Jasmine purposely created this frightening drama just so that she would be able to drop a bomb at the end about taking birth control, and he would be too scared to react to that. Yeah, there were a couple comments in this, and I remember thinking something similar, but I don't know. But the way that I saw the progression was she started off by talking about so if we just live inside a speculative emotional place and relationally traumatized place for her, abandonment seems quite clearly indicated by her behavior in her past, and so, or some kind of mistreatment that is ever present with her now and distorts her views and distorts her idea of emotions and that kind of thing. But so she didn't like the Christmas thing, and she's been thinking about it, and so she's like, okay, I need him to prove that he can obey me, because then if he obeys me, then I feel safe. And then she talks about the vacation, and he agrees to that, and she's like, she even said, obedience is great, you're a good boy, you're obeying me, and so she feels a little safer. Then in her emotional space, there are things that have been kind of building up for her that she didn't feel ready to talk about because she didn't feel safe enough to talk about. But now that she feels safe, she's like, okay, now that I feel safe, what's first on the agenda? The first thing on the agenda is your exes. I feel threatened by them because I'm worried you're going to abandon me. And this is, a lot of speculation. But then she goes to that place where she's like, okay, instead of saying what I proposed in the video of just like, I feel insecure about your exes, can you prove to me that you're not going to abandon me? She focuses on these little things. Again, it's about obedience. And so she says, you will change the decor in your house, and I will criticize you. So there's a number of layers to this dominance. I will tell you that you're stupid, and you will agree. I will tell you that your decor and your clothes and everything about you is wrong, and you will agree. I will tell you that you can never have contact with those people, and you will agree, which, by the way, is, these are all this is the play. I talked about this, and this is the playbook for the domestic violence perpetrator. You criticize and break the person down so that this is kind of the beginning of gaslighting, where you're basically saying you don't know anything and you're stupid. You know nothing. The other thing is to get total control of their life and to get total control of their social life, because if they're isolated from other people, then it's easier to control. Usually where people are coming from is a place that they believe that this control will lead to total control of the person, which will lead to safety. Like they can finally relax. In the same way that when I want to feel attachment safety, I have date night with my wife, or I hug my wife, or we spend time together or something, For domestic violence perpetrators and partner violence perpetrators, they see that attachment safety as control. If they get obedience, then they can relax. Of course, it doesn't really work that way, and they were taught that by watching behavior, or they were rewarded for that behavior growing up. Anyway, so then she starts to go after that. She's like, okay, well, I got a little bit of safety. Now let's get more safety. And so she starts to dominate in the ways I talked about. That didn't work. He became either fight or flight, or he's like, okay, here we go. I'll be as diplomatic as possible, and I'll say, well, I don't think you need to attack us or me. I kind of like those colors. That triggers her, because through the distortion, that's an indication of abandonment, and then all the past abandonment comes flooding in. She completely decompensates, which we saw. Then he approaches her later. She's sort of calmed down a little bit by that point, and I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but it went to her liking, and then she felt safe again. And then she's like, okay, well, what's next on the list? Well, what's next on the list is, and then they were talking about kids. The topic of kids actually came up, and then that kind of triggered her of just like, oh, okay, well, what's next on the list? Well, the next thing on the list is I have to tell him this thing. So that's kind of how I saw it play out. It didn't seem, do I, and a lot of comments were along the lines of that this is just some mass manipulation on her part, as if she woke up in the morning and says, ha ha ha, I'm going to do this. I'm going to screw with him in this way. Then I'm going to relent, and then I'm going to get him off his game. And then I'm going to, I don't believe that. It's possible, but it's not my experience with people who exhibit this behavior. They're usually just, they're distorted, and they're reacting to what they feel is right in the moment. But from the outside, it's not right. You think of Danielle, it's a similar situation. Anyway. Jesse and Jennifer. So I was talking about how Jesse keeps saying, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. This is the best. Pop says, I can see how Jesse might have been surprised by the reaction of 90. So I was talking about how I wonder if Jesse knows how he was reacted to when he was with Darcy, and he's trying to put out a different vibe to the internet, and he's really uptight in with Jennifer because he's like, I need to prove to everyone that I'm not the way that they saw me. And so he's swinging too far in this other direction by always being positive. I don't know, though. Pop says, I can see how Jesse might have been surprised by the reaction of 90 Day Fiancé fans. And his attitude now would be about reputation management. In the moment, I'm sure he felt all of his feelings were justified with Darcy, and that Darcy was being abusive towards him. It's such a strange feeling when you find out that the lashing out you do due to fear and anxiety is actually powerful enough to hurt the feelings of others. And in some ways, you're sort of the bad guy of the situation. Yeah, Pop, actually, that's a great comment in that you are seeing yourself, and maybe all of us, and Jesse in this way, and that we're all like this. That I guarantee you, if you and me were on this show and on long enough and pushed sufficiently, and we'd quote unquote defended ourselves or reacted to someone else's toxicity or whatever, that you and me would exhibit behavior that would become deplorable in the 90 Day Fiancé fandom universe. We are all capable of thinking we're doing something that makes sense. The best way that I've found, and I've worked with myself and with my clients on this, is the next time you're in a fight, just record. Don't do it secretly. Say, hey, I'm going to record this. I'm not going to share it with anyone, but I want to listen to myself. I want to find out what I'm saying back, And then the next day or a week later, preferably longer spans of time, because if you listen to it the next day, you might still be in that mindset. But a week later, a month later, listen to that recording. I guarantee you will be shocked at how horrible your tone is with your partner, and how your word choice is not the way you thought it was. We believe we are computers when it comes to recording our experiences. We are not. Everything is, particularly conflict, is filtered through a massive, massive filter of self-preservation, of emotional interpretation, of the way it felt. It's universal that when I work with couples, they will, one, disagree about what happened in the moment in the conflict, but two, they will say things like, well, but I did say that, because we'll talk about what they could have done differently. And one partner will say, well, it would have helped if you would have said this. And the other partner will say, I did say that. I did. And often my suspicion is they felt like they said it, but they actually never said it. They felt like the vibe of that was communicated, but they never actually exuded it out of their face. In other words, talking. Kirk, that's another way of saying exuding from one's face. Rainy Day says, seems like Jesse suffers from anxiety and covers it up with being positive. I recognize this behavior. I react the same way in situations I feel anxious in. Like, no problem here. Everything is wonderful. Life is wonderful. Please move along now and don't ask any deep questions or pass judgment on me. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Allison says, this reminds me, his behavior, Jesse's behavior, reminds me of love bombing. He is making her feel like she's the best thing, and this is the first time that he has ever felt this way so quickly about someone, gushing about how close they are so soon. It is too much, too soon, too fast, and I don't believe it. He doesn't seem sincere or authentic to me. Yeah, so, I've talked about love bombing. The vast majority of love bombing behaviors are done by people subconsciously. Some psychopaths and sadists and manipulators are love bombing on purpose, but most are not. So I guess there's a possibility that he's a psychopath and he's love bombing or lying or something as a way of trying to manipulate. If he is truly love bombing, then it's more likely that he is desperate for closeness. The other thing to think about, he's pretty young. I forgot how young he was because he looks older. He looks like he's in his 30s. I think he's mid-20s or maybe late 20s, early late 20s, 20s. I can't remember. Anyway, point is he's young. So the fact that, young in my eyes, the possibility that he's never really had a really close, loving relationship with someone, it's possible. So his relationship, because I think when you watch it, you're like, why are you reacting this way? But imagine if he were 16 and there was this, beautiful woman that they had good times together and maybe sex was good. And you're just like, oh my God, this is the best. There's a possibility that is genuine for him. Having said that, we could also imagine a world in which he's trying to amp it up for the show, or he's trying to amp it up to suck her in, or he's trying to amp it up to tell everyone, look what a great guy I am. I'm in love. Doesn't everyone love a love story? It's hard to know. But I don't know. I think it's also possible that they genuinely have love for each other and there's really nothing to criticize about it. The more I watch of the show, the more I think that's possible. The more I think because I don't know about y'all, but it kind of seemed like a manufactured relationship. I mean, they were two 90-day fiance personalities, controversial personalities set up. When I first heard that, I was like, is this some sort of fake thing that everyone's just doing to get views and that kind of thing? But the more I watch, I'm like, I think these two actually have chemistry. I think they actually do like each other a lot, particularly him. So, maybe in 5 years they're still together, and we were just seeing that. So I don't know. And maybe he is just like, oh my God, I've never been in a relationship like this. This feels great. Tanya and Sinjin episode. Murasan says, aren't over-functioners responsible, hands-on planners, have their own stuff together? I'm confused as to why Tanya is considered by you to be an over-functioner. She pushes Sinjin to get his act together, but she's in the same bucket as him. She does not have it all together. Am I wrong? Yeah, there were a number of comments along these lines that are, relevant. And I'm glad that this clarification, I'm given the opportunity. And perhaps I haven't explained it well, and perhaps I was even explaining it in a wrong way. I can't remember exactly what I was saying. But overfunctioners it's more of an attitude and a need and a desperation rather than a lifestyle. The word overfunctioner and the word underfunctioner implies that, and sometimes I might be even wording it this way, which is incorrect, that overfunctioners are competent and underfunctioners are incompetent. Often that is the case, but that is not the essence of the overfunctioner or the codependent. Overfunctioners and codependents can be very functional, and often they are, but they can also be very dysfunctional in their life. Their life could be in shambles, particularly as you look at it from the outside. But that's, you can still have, so for example, with Tanya, the path is you were raised in a way that made you need to believe that you were the one in control, you were the one over functioning. And your self-esteem comes from that. Your sense of safety comes from taking care of other people's screw-ups. You believe that's your role in life. That's the way you love other people. She was parentified. There was indications of that. I don't know if it's true, but who knows? But that's the way the codependent person, the overfunctioner, is raised. And so they come from a mindset of, I have to take care of other people. That's where my safe zone is. that's what love is. Love is me taking care of someone else as they screw things up. For most of the codependents, they will engineer their lives to be very competent so that they can prove to other people, look how competent I am and look how incompetent you are. And they'll often seek very incompetent people to be paired up with because it's convenient. But there are some times when the overfunctioning or codependent person, for whatever reason, isn't really put together themselves, but they come from a mindset that they are. They will also sometimes pair up with other people who are at the same level of competence or success, or maybe even higher competence than them, but they will see them as underfunctioning, and they will socialize them to underfunction. And that's kind of what we saw, was that if we go off the assumption or the premise that the two of them were actually functioning in life at the same level, but she, if you notice, she kept trying to make him into the underfunctioner. The focus that she had, the way she saw the world, and the way she engineered things, because people were pointing out she's not a overfunctioner because her career isn't going well, her lifestyle isn't going well. She goes to Costa Rica or wherever she went for. She's the free spirit. She's trying to criticize him for being a free spirit, but when you look at her life, it's very much of a free spirit. So I'm glad that you pointed that out, because one, it gives me a chance to clarify that, or two, I was explaining it wrong because I was oversimplifying the concept of codependency. To equate it with competence is wrong. Often they are competent. Often they are very competent, but that's not the premise of codependency or functioning. So hope that makes sense to people. I'm always wondering, is all my babbling making any sense to people? So, and that is, kind of my prime directive in life, is to make sense to people, because I feel like that's the whole thing of this whole thing, is, as a professor and as a podcaster, is, am I making sense? If you were here, I'd go, does that make sense to you? Now, you can always comment below, and that'll help me out. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.